Hello, welcome back to Behavior and Environment. This is video part 4, and we're continuing with Objective 7, Define Response and Response Cycle. And Objective 8, Classify examples as responses or behaviors. Well, behavior is an umbrella term, referring to multiple responses. A behavior is defined by its effect on the environment. And if responses have different effects on the environment, they're different behaviors. Organisms do not have behavior. We don't use that terminology. They emit or engage in or demonstrate behavior or exhibit behavior. But they don't have behavior. They don't have behaviors. And here are some examples of behavior. So someone can engage in yelling, hitting, and asking with words. And they can all be types of cookie getting behavior if they all get access to cookies. Or running to the lunchroom and running to catch a friend playing tag are behaviors. Those are two different behaviors because they have different effects on the environment. Running to the lunchroom will get you access to the lunchroom quickly. Running to catch a friend playing tag is ultimately will get you involved in a game of tag. Right? So there's different consequences even though the form of the behavior looks the same, running. There's different consequences, so they're different behaviors. Okay, so if you played tag 4 times, you did not engage in 4 behaviors. You engaged in behavior 4 times. The behavior is playing tag. But each of those 4 times a kid played tag, the outcome isn't different. The outcome is the same in all of them, in that the behavior they engaged in resulted in them having the experience of playing tag, or being involved in the game. So they didn't engage in different behaviors. It was four instances of the same behavior. All right, that's what's meant by you engage in a behavior 4 times. It's 4 responses or 4 instances of the behavior. Let's look at the next one. It is precise to say he asked for chocolate 15 times. But it's incorrect to say I observed 15 chocolate asking behaviors. That's because each time he asked for chocolate, it would have, if this were a typical situation and chocolate were reliably provided, well, each of those responses would produce chocolate. They have the same outcome. Okay, so they're the same behavior, so you wouldn't say there were 15 behaviors if he asked for chocolate 15 times. You'd say there were 15 responses or 15 instances. So I can contrast that with, let's say someone asked for chocolate twice and then they ask for milk once. Now we have 2 behaviors because there are 2 actions that produce either one of 2 different consequences: access to chocolate or access to milk. Hitting oneself in the face 3 times is not 3 behaviors. If the consequence produced by it is only, let's say, the pain, produced by hitting oneself in the face, that's just 3 instances of the same behavior. Okay. Now, hitting someone in the face and they get upset with you and yell at you, and then hitting someone else in the face and they walk away from you, or hitting someone else in the face and then they give you their wallet. Those are 3 different consequences for hitting someone in the face, right? So that would be 3 behaviors. Okay. So let's look at response then. So a response is a single instance of behavior. So examples: kicking a ball, putting a coin in a vending machine, a sneeze, putting soap on hands. Each one of those is a single instance of behavior. Now a response cycle is the beginning, middle, and end of a response. And so you can use response and response cycle interchangeably, but typically in behavior analysis and applied behavior analysis, we don't really use in conversation with people and in much writing the term response cycle. But it's a technical term that's out there. So you have response and response cycle. Usually you're going to use the words behavior or response. Now here are examples of response cycle. Moving the hand towards the soap, touching it, and picking it up. There's the beginning, middle, and end of that response, so that's the response cycle. Getting the coin from your pocket, bringing it to the coin slot, and then releasing the coin into the slot. Or swinging your leg back, swinging it forward, and making contact with the ball. Those are all examples of response cycles. So let's go to some ASRs. ASR 17. He had problem behavior in class. Is this correct usage of the term behavior? A, yes, B, no, or C, it depends. Give me a couple more seconds. Alright, I'll close the poll, and the answer here is B, no. Having problem behavior is incorrect usage, but if it said he exhibited problem behavior in class, that would be correct usage. ASR 18. He left his chair in class 10 times. I counted 10 behaviors. Is this a correct use of the term behavior? A, yes, B, no, or it depends. C. Give you a few more seconds. Alright, I'll close the poll, and the answer here is B, no. Leaving this chair would be behavior, and then if it happened 10 times, we say there were 10 responses or 10 instances of this behavior. ASR 19. She took a bite of lasagna. The behavior occurred once. Is this an accurate use of the word behavior? A, yes, B, no, C, it depends. Give me a couple more seconds. Alright, I'll go ahead and close the poll, and the answer here is A, yes. It's okay to say the behavior occurred once. You wouldn't have to say, just because it happened once doesn't mean you have to say it's an instance, or you don't have to say she responded once, although that would be correct. Or this was one response, that's correct too, but to say the behavior occurred once, that's also correct. ASR 20, she engaged in independent spoon feeding for 5 bites. Thus, 5 instances of independent feeding occurred. Is this an accurate use of the word response? A, yes, B, no, or C, it depends. A couple more seconds. Alright, I'll close the poll, and the answer here is A, yes. Alright, now we're on to Objective 9, to list and define fundamental properties of behavior. So a property is a fundamental quality of a phenomenon. A dimensional quantity, often just called a quantity, is a quantifiable aspect of a property. Now, temporal locus is a fundamental property of behavior. It's defined as a response occurs at a point in time in relation to a preceding environmental event. So remember our discussion of environment, context, and stimulus. Behavior occurs in a context. Okay, context is that aspect of the environment that includes stimuli, and stimuli are the change in the environment that precede behavior. Okay, so temporal locus is that relationship between the occurrence of an event and then the occurrence of a response. The response occurs at a point in time in relation to that preceding environmental event, or in relation to that stimulus. That's temporal locus. Repeatability just means that a response can reoccur. It can happen once, twice, 3 times, and so forth. Temporal extent is a response occupies time. So this difference between temporal locus and temporal extent. Temporal locus, a response occurs at a point in time. Temporal extent, a response occupies time. So temporal extent is that property of behavior. That behavior can last over time. It doesn't necessarily just occur at a single point in time, at a single moment. And then the last fundamental property is a combination between repeatability and temporal locus. Okay. Those two interact. Now, I mentioned here that a property is a fundamental quality of a phenomenon. A dimensional quantity is a quantifiable aspect of the property. So these are the fundamental properties of behavior, and there are aspects of these properties that can be quantified or measured, and that's what we're going to look at next, dimensional quantities. Objective 10 is to list and define dimensional quantities of behavior. Countability is the number of times a response occurs. If I snap my fingers 3 times, you count the number of times the response occurred. 3, that was the countability of that behavior. Okay. Duration, the beginning, middle, and end of the response. Right? It's the beginning, middle, and end of the response cycle. Alright, so I can hold this cup of water. I'm holding it, and then I set it down. And if you were to start a timer, when I picked up the cup until I set it down, that would be the duration. For example, the number of seconds that I held the cup. Okay, how many times did I do it? Once. That's the countability. Latency is the time between the onset of the stimulus and the beginning of the response or response cycle. Well, okay, so remember that one of the fundamental properties was repeatability, right? So a response must repeat. If a response repeats, then you can count multiple responses. So repeatability is related to countability. For duration, that should look or remind you of temporal extent, that a response occupies time. Only if a response occupies time can you measure the beginning, middle, and end of that response. For latency, latency is related to the fundamental property of temporal locus, right? A response has to occur at a point in time in order for you to measure the time between an event or stimulus and then the onset of the response or the response cycle. So if your cell phone rings and 2 seconds later you answer the phone, the latency is 2 seconds. How many times did you answer your phone? Once. That's the count. And let's say the answering your phone is taking your hand, reaching in your pocket, getting your phone, picking it up, pressing talk. If that lasts 1.5 seconds, we would say that's the duration. Okay, the beginning, middle, and end of that response or response cycle. Rate and frequency. The rate or frequency refer to the number of responses per unit time. So here we're going to use them interchangeably at the moment and treat rate and frequency as the same. But sometimes frequency is used interchangeably with count or countability. In that sometimes the term frequency is used to just refer to the number of times a response occurred or a behavior occurred without specifying its relationship to the passage of time. IRT is the time between 2 successive responses or response cycles. It's the time between the end of one response cycle and the beginning of the next. Okay, so if I pick up this cup and then I set it down and 3 seconds pass and then I pick up the cup and then I set it down and 1 second passes and I pick up the cup. The first IRT was 3 seconds. The second IRT was 1 second. So what I'm doing is I'm measuring the time between the end of one response cycle and the beginning of the next. Okay, you can measure rate and frequency or IRT because of the fundamental property of the combination between repeatability and temporal locus. When repeatability and temporal locus interact, you can measure rate or frequency, and you can measure IRT. Okay, and you calculate rate by dividing the number of responses that occurred by the unit of time. So let's say you did a 10-minute observation and the behavior happened 6 times. You would calculate the rate by dividing 6 by 10 minutes. Okay. Now, IRT is the inverse of rate. So instead of dividing, to calculate IRT, instead of dividing 6 responses by 10 minutes, you would flip that, divide 10 minutes by 6 responses, and that's going to give you the mean or average inner response time. Acceleration is the last dimensional quantity, so there are 6 dimensional quantities. It's a change in rate over time. All right. The next objectives will be 11, identify relations between fundamental properties and dimensional quantities of behavior. Then 12 is given scenarios, select relevant dimensional quantities. 13 is define topography. 14 is define function. 15 is define response class. All right. So I want to give a disclaimer here before I discuss this changeability. Changeability is not going to be on any test that you encounter. And in fact, changeability is not, in the field of behavior analysis, this is not recognized. Changeability is not recognized as a fundamental property. But there's a lot of research on variability in behavior that I think ultimately may lead researchers at some point to go ahead and suggest that there is a fundamental property of behavior called changeability. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about what I think about this, but just know that this is not accepted by anybody in any sense. This is me projecting out into the future, suggesting that, hey, this may be regarded as a fundamental property someday. Okay, so changeability refers to the long accepted fact that a response may differ. So that's all changeability means. It means a response may differ. And 2 or more successive responses that differ along 1 or more dimensions allow for the measurement of the dimensional quantity referred to here as variability. Okay, so now there are some folks in behavior analysis who recognize variability as a dimensional quantity of behavior, and there are others who question that. But here we're going to say, yep, we accept it essentially. So variability is a dimensional quantity of behavior related to this fundamental property of changeability. And variability is a dimension of operant behavior. Okay, and that's based on the seminal paper by Page and Nuringer in 1985. So, like I said, there's my disclaimer right there. This is not going to be on the BACB task list, and I don't think you'll hear about this anywhere else. So I'll just give you now we're just going to continue. So I'll give you some examples here now of the other dimensional quantities. Alright, so we have countability, which is the dog barks 6 times. That's countability. It doesn't reference time at all. Duration. Sam spent 4 minutes making her bed. An example of latency. The teacher asked, what is 3 plus 3? And 10 seconds later, the student said 6. Rate or frequency. I swam 2 laps per minute during a 10-minute swim practice. So 2 laps per minute is a rate or a frequency. IRT, the average time between instances of hitting self on head was 5 seconds. So let's each time, on average, as the person hit themselves in the head during an observation period, 5 seconds passed between each instance. Acceleration. I swam 5 laps in 10 minutes, then 10 laps in 10 minutes, then 20 laps in 10 minutes. So notice that the rate is increasing across swims or swim practices. Variability. in a 1-minute period, the child emitted 2 variant requests for juice. First they said, I want juice. Then they said, can I have some? And then they said, will you share? So I want juice is the first response that's used as the basis for determining if the others are variant or if they're different. So can I have some was different from I want juice, so that's counted as the first variant response. Will you share is different from can I have some, and so that's considered as the next variant response. So there are 2 variant requests for juice. Alright, that wraps up this video part. We'll go through some ASRs on fundamental properties and dimensional quantities in the next video part, beginning with Objective 11.